Okay, hi all. Welcome to today's webinar on the top blog, which is Rise to DevOps Pitfalls and Practices from the Fields by Edwin van der Thiel. So here's a quick introduction about Edwin. Edwin has had a broad interest in technology, especially in application. In 2011, his passion for creating new solutions led him to the field of software development, where society offered the opportunity to make the switch. Since then, he has worked in different customers at various locations among Netherlands, India, Oman, and recently joined Yulin and Menno in a blockchain inspiration session. In the past years, he has been active in different communities and the sharing of knowledge. Among others, these are the ones like in Microsoft Heroes, the Omnichannel Core team, the teaching courses on JavaScript, Git, Node.js, JS, blockchain, and also speaking at Heroes Academy and Microsoft Tech Days. So over to you, Edwin, to let us know more about the best practices and the pitfalls in developers.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we are
Okay.
able to hear you.
Okay, great. Welcome to this session. I prepared some introduction to Rise to DevOps, to try to get some information from the field and get some input on that. So the first thing I was wondering is, this is a process I've seen sometimes, and it's basically where we get a customer who's saying, I want DevOps. And then we're saying, okay, we can help you. So they all say, so I've been a couple of times there that they say, okay, we want to start with one team. And then associate, of course, we're going to say that, okay, we'll be there with you as soon as we can. And then we're going to start with one team. So this, I see, often leads to a lot of frustration and sometimes unhappy customers or unhappy teams. And as far as I've seen, that often I saw one person that cannot hear me. Is that only one person or?
We are able to hear you. There's no issue with that.
Oh, great. So the cause of this typically is then when you start with one team, that team will get all the challenges of the complete organization of where the organization isn't yet adapting to either Agile or DevOps. And so the team is suddenly in charge of doing all the organizational changes as well. I found this to be frustrating a number of times. So just to introduce myself very quickly, my name is Edwin. I've been with Society for some years, and I've been a member of different teams in different contexts, mostly, either developer or lead developer. And I've been using many different processes throughout the years, like Waterfall, the Prince 2, but also the Agile, and in some aspects also the DevOps process. So during this time, I collected some experiences, and I want to share them today with you. And to do it in the following order, I want to go quickly into to some characteristics of the different processes, just so that we all have a basic baseline of what these processes are about, just to see that we're not confusing different things. and then to go into some topics that I think are very important into changing these processes, like the trust, responsibility, and commitment, the planning and process, also team requirements for DevOps, and then go through some generic pitfalls that I've also encountered. So on to the characteristics. First, let's take a look at the waterfall process. Of course, we all know this. I'll go through this very quickly. So the waterfall process is basically this, right? You start with requirements, you do some design, implementation. After that, you do some verification, some testing, and then you hand it over to the ops guys, the operations, start doing maintenance. For this process, because it's basically one step at a time, you go down the road and so since the process is very simple, also with the environment, well, you need some environment, one per stage. But for example, with coding, you can do some very classic branching. You have a trunk branch on which you develop, then you do some integration, and after that you go to production. And you don't really have any requirements on that, simply because the process doesn't need all that much. With automation also, because everything you're doing once, you're implementing your system. After that, you're doing the testing. So typically you won't deploy very often. So automation, for example, is not, you don't have a lot of needs on that. As far as the team goes, each stage requires a separate number of people to execute that stage. So, for example, you do requirements, then you get some analysts in a team. They analyze the requirements, goes to the architects that they will do some design. But basically, they don't. After that, it won't need the requirements guys anymore. After that, also the design is done. You do the planning, and then the implementation guys will just get a stack of documents on their desk, and they will start implementing. So each stage requires specialized skills and also different people there. And if we look at quality, quality is basically managed through each phase, right? So if the design is done correctly and it is interpreted correctly, the implementation will also be done as designed. And then you have in the verification and testing phase, you test to see if everything is as specified, and if not, it will go back. So to see if everything is done right, you have a design phase in which you basically design everything that needs to be done. And to see if the right things were done, you will go into the verification phase and you will test to see if everything is as specified. So if we go onward to Agile, to the Agile to Scrum phase, then we get a different type of process. So the process with Agile is basically it's run through through each sprint, right? You take a couple of weeks, up to 4 weeks, and you do one sprint. For that sprint, you collect some items in the backlog, and after that, you implement them, and it will be shipped after your sprint. It's a potentially shippable product. So you have a product owner that breaks down epics and features to user stories. You will fill the backlog and will continue to prioritize. So for this process to keep on going, your product owner will collect items for up to, or you will have refined up to 3 sprints ahead, and then you will go through this phase. And for this, typically you'll see environments like development, a test environment, some acceptance, whether customers are going to accept the product, and production environment. So basically, because we have this iterative process, and we see a lot of times that the product is not deployed immediately after it's been accepted, right? We've seen a lot of times that it will take some days, weeks, sometimes even months before the product is actually into production. So you will need a more complex way to manage your code. For this, for this process, Gitflow was created. It supports a lot of the steps you need to manage your code. In a lot of teams, Gitflow is common, but they will modify it slightly to incorporate the process as it is done per customer. For example, I've been the customer I'm now. We did a modification because they're only deploying the product every 4 months, 6 months. So we need to manage a lot of different releases, and we need to be able to patch some release when it's in production. So for this, we have separated also release branches, which is not supported by Gitflow, for example. But basically, this is the plan. And for automation, of course, since you're doing everything every couple of weeks, you really want to do automation, because if you don't, you will quickly get lost in, for example, regression testing of your product. So this is actually, it's recommended, it's not required. You can do it manually, but still, you will see that quickly you'll run into a whole lot of operational overhead. If we look at a team, so the team, let's start to shift a bit, right? So where in Waterfall everyone had their own skill, they basically do what they do best. In a team, you have to do the things you do best as a team. This means also that you will start sharing some skills. So, for example, if you have one tester in a team, you will get someone from development to also understand testing as well, because if the person gets sick, for example, you do want to continue with your process. And in this case, also the skills needed, because you're not only responsible for one single phase, but for the delivering of the potentially shippable product back to the organization, you will need all skills required in the different phase. So analysts, testers, developers, anything you need to get the product done. So if we go into quality, of course, because we're not delivering the product once, but we'll go through it a lot of times. So you'll see that acceptance is done with regression testing, and typically with automated regression testing. So you will do it once every sprint. And acceptance by a demo. So you will, after the sprint, you will demo to the customer. You will show all the great things that you've built so far. Check if things were done right. Typically, we do peer review and also unit testing to make sure that it stays right. And to do the right things, we do regression testing. So a tester will test the new features that have been implemented this sprint. This process works very well. There is also one pitfall to keep in mind here. I haven't mentioned it explicitly, but there is also the retrospective. I've seen that being forgotten on some teams, but it's a very important process. If you want to get an effective Scrum team, you will need to do the retrospectives to make sure that every time if something isn't going well, that you will improve it. You will treat this point seriously, make the points actionable, and make sure that it doesn't happen again, so to speak. So going onward toward DevOps. So the DevOps process is a bit, or the DevOps is a bit different in that it doesn't have blocked. It doesn't have blocks of time in which you will deliver increments of your products. Basically, process is continuous. So with every item you will pick up, each story, it will go through the same flow. You will develop, you will build, you will test, and then you will deploy it. And then it will be in your production environment. So this is typical for DevOps to lose all the increments of the product. It's also important because you want to get immediate feedback on everything you're doing. So if we look at an environment for this, there are some difference. I didn't put acceptance in here. Actually, I was doubting on whether to put testing there. Basically, you just do development and then you go to production. But since things like regression testing is automated, it does need a test environment, but typically it will be brought down and regenerated every time you need to do a test run. Typically, we have that in our CI/CD pipeline. So also the environment is automatically built up and it's automatically taken down again after testing. Important to note here also that when I talk about user stories in this case, I'm talking about not only the user stories itself, but also bugs, incidents, new features, security, test results, etc. So for branching, since we don't actually work with software releases anymore, but rather with the continuous improvement of a product, you can do branching a bit simpler. They developed GitHub Flow for it, which is a really nice fit to do it. Basically, you have one branch of your one line of your software, and you will take feature branches to implement each item, each backlog item to improve your product. And automation, of course, since you're going to deploy many times a day, you wouldn't want to do that manually. So make sure that you automate everything, and make sure. So if you don't do it, you will crash and burn very quickly. If we look at the team, so the team setup. What you basically get with your team is that you, since you're also doing the operations part with your team itself, so not only the development of the product, but also the production part, and you're monitoring, and you're doing infrastructure, and you're also handling the feedback from that. Your team needs to get proficient in each one of these areas. So that means also to get operations skills, the security skills inside of your team. It doesn't mean that everyone has to do everything, which is a common misconception. I've heard this a number of times. You need to get basic proficiency so that you can do the basic tasks, given that the environment is there and everything is in place. But don't become specialist in each one of these fields. It's just not doable, and you have colleagues on which to depend. What we've seen a lot is you take someone from outside if you need to do something specific. For example, where now we're doing a redesign of our test strategy. So for this, we have a specialized tester that we included in our team from outside. And he's going to do the test plan, the setup, etc. After this is all done, we're going as a team, we're going to adopt this so that we can add the various features that are in the software by ourselves. But setting up with this framework, we leave it to some specialists. Also with quality. So with quality, it's sort of like with Agile, except If we look at acceptance, because we're not going to do a demo every 2 weeks, for example, to our product owner, we're going to do demos when required, basically. So if we want to show something to our customer, of course we're going to show it because we built it, we're proud of it, so we're going to show it. But if you have a new feature and you want to see if it's working correctly or you want to be accepted, you typically want to be accepted by your end users, right? And for this, very strong is A/B testing. A/B testing is a way to where you can have a group A and B, and you will say, okay, 10% of my users is in group B, and they will get the new features, and everyone else doesn't. So then you can see with a small group if it's actually being adopted correctly, and if not, you can turn it off quickly. The feature toggles are very powerful for this. To see if everything is done right, again, we're doing peer reviews. Also in our release pipelines, we're integrating quality scans. You might have heard of SonarQube, but there are also different types. So we have these scans built in, so we get some automated reporting on if everything is done right. To see if we did the right things again, we're doing regression testing, but automated in this case, of course. The automation part is mandatory. If you don't do this, you will lose control. And of course, we're doing the full testing pyramid, so that means unit testing, component testing, integration testing, and also with some security testing as well. You might have heard of it, there are DevSecOps. I think it's just another word for the same thing. So if we look at, so these were the basic processes. So if we look at how to go from one process to another, what are the differences and what to pay attention to? We have the field of trust, responsibility, commitment. This is a very important part between those processes. So we have the waterfall process. Basically, the responsibility of one single person is not that much, right? You're in your own area, you do your own thing, you're responsible for that part. For example, the code is correct, or the thing, this feature has been tested correctly, or the design is as required. But you will not feel any commitment to the whole the product as a whole. If someone says, okay, it's wrong, then yeah, okay, I did my thing right. So we see that you're very isolated to your own part, and that might be okay in some cases. If you look at the things with Agile, with Scrum, you'll see a change. The responsibilities for the team is, and the commitment is to the product, right? And the product is delivered correctly. This corresponds with the level of trust your customer puts in you. So if your customer trusts you, and they will say, okay, I trust you to deliver this product, and then you will feel also responsible to deliver that product as the customer wants. If they put little trust in you, you will see that they will over specify and will tell you every single detail just so that you're not missing anything. This also works the other way around. I've seen also, for example, refinements where every bit is asked, just to make sure that you don't get hit around the head with some wrong implementation afterwards. So these are not healthy parts. If you have a good trust relationship, then it should be you should be able to the customer should give good functional use stories, defining what they want from a functional perspective. The team will take the freedom to give a proper implementation, and if there's feedback, it doesn't work quite correctly, or quite, you will hear in a demo, you will just ask product owner, is this like you had in mind, and then you can change it. So as soon as you see something being overspecified, it's normally where either the organization is still in waterfall terms, so they want to specify everything, or the trust level just isn't there. So if you're having a problem with this in Agile, take a look at DevOps, because DevOps scales it up one bit, right? You're responsible for the whole life cycle of the product, also in well into production, the monitoring, the managing of the incidents, everything. So to be able to do that, you also need a customer to put trust in you. So the team will also feel responsible to get it to the best level they can and commit themselves to this part. I've heard, these were some colleagues I heard, they were in a DevOps team with company here in Netherlands, and the greatest thing I've heard from them was they were doing DevOps for, I think, 3 months. They had a nice product. It was running in production, and suddenly the customer, they talked about that they wanted to use it outside of office hours. So this team started thinking about doing actually shifts outside of office hours, and they found a way to manage doing this at their own initiative. So this is the level of commitment that you typically want in a DevOps environment, that the team will feel responsible for the system. They will find some solution to give the support it needs. If as a product owner you have to force the team to do these after-hour support, then typically you don't have a healthy level of trust built into your system. Just give a quick recap. So there's you might have some trust issues if the team keeps receiving technical stories. This might be because the product owner doesn't quite trust the team to build the things that they want to build if they don't specify everything. Might also be that the team wants to get all the information because they're afraid of doing things wrong. So this is a thing to keep in mind. The story should be functional. If the team keeps explaining how something else caused problem X, that might also be a sign that they don't typically feel responsible for everything that's happening. Especially in DevOps, of course, this is very worrying. If your team doesn't own up to something happening and wanting to actively solve it, then you're in a bad situation, because you need these problems to be solved anyway. So if we look at the part of planning and process, there are a couple of things. So the first one is the burndown. The burndown is typically a good sign. This is from the Agile process, but it gives a good sign of when to start switching to DevOps. And the best sign is that the burndown, it has to be stable, right? So if you look at the left, you will see basically a mini waterfall. So this might be a problem if you're willing to switch to DevOps, because you're going to lose your boundaries. And if you're doing mini waterfall, it means you implement a lot of user stories, and then you will use the end of the sprint to get the testing process done and deliver basically everything. So if you don't have a stable burn down, it means you actually need the ending of a sprint to get everything down to zero. So of course, if we're going to lose those boundaries, then nothing will ever get done, sort of. If you look at the right, that's also not too healthy. It's where either you're not in control of your planning process and you just plan too little, and then you have to add things to your sprint again, or once again it's a waterfall, but over the line of the sprint. So you need the center figure. That's a good sign. If you can keep this up, it's a good sign that you're ready to go DevOps, because if you lose the borders, nothing will really happen. You will just continue handling user stories. So looking at the DevOps process, basically this is it. So very important in DevOps is every backlog item is being added to, or every bit of work, it has to come in through one funnel. The reason why this is important is because you don't want to collect many items from many locations to implement and then completely lose control. So you need one place to centralize this. So every incident that comes from monitoring, every bug, every user incident, a user story, security, testing, test results, everything your team needs to do, it will need to be put on the backlog. Basically, a product owner owns this backlog and will make sure that it's continually prioritized. So all the team has to do is take a look at the backlog, see what is the next item, implement it, and deploy to production. Of course, there are a couple of things. If you don't automate this process, then you're going to lose control. When you don't monitor, things will happen in production, especially after you release different versions of your software, and you will not see something went wrong, and you will lose control of your product. If the quality is not maintained, or if the backlog is too big, then the organization will decide that you should lose a team member or someone has to be idle. You will get a disruption inside of your team. So you have to get a stable backlog as well. Make sure that it doesn't decrease too much. If it increases too much, it's also a problem because you're starting to lose control. Obviously, your team can't handle the load, so you'll need to act on that as well. So there might be some signs that your process fails. So if we look at one thing, especially in Agile, if you get, for example, team sprints, it's a generally sign that the team starts working Agile, but the management still thinks, okay, we're doing Waterfall. We're going to deliver once every 6 months or whatever. It can help make a transition, but be aware that it shouldn't take too long. At some point, you will have to get into the process of delivering every couple of weeks and iteratively increment your own software. If you're doing team sprint, you don't have full control over your process yet. We did this at a company a couple of years ago. We made a transition from Waterfall to Agile, and we're doing it with only one team. So to make sure everything fit to that organization, we had actually a routine of doing 4 implementation sprints, then one called stabilizing sprint. Then we had an acceptance test sprint where we could also bug fix everything that were the results of the acceptance testing. And then it was delivered to the customer every 6 months, I think. This process helped us to make sure the organization started getting used to working agile. And you can manage it for 1 or 2 years, but then really the organization needs to improve if you want to keep this up, because basically you're just doing waterfall. So another problem might be that when I'm calling it DevOps heartbeat here, and the heartbeat is basically the rate at which you're processing backlog items. So the incidents, the stories, etc. And that you want to be a steady heartbeat, because that means also your production environment is updated regularly. The customer will feel like it's continually improving. And as soon as they start skipping, then you get, for example, a stable production environment where nothing changed for a week, and slowly you're starting to work back into sprints again, delivering every couple of weeks. So if this keeps up too long, you will basically fall back to agile. So keep this in mind. So when there is no monitoring, this is actually quite serious, because well, I like to compare this to DevOps to running a marathon, where agile is sprinting. DevOps is like running a marathon, and if you don't do monitoring, basically you're running the marathon blindfolded. And you might make it, but most likely you're going somewhere the wrong way. So yeah, as a last sign that the process fails, so it's over engineering. So when you're over engineering, means you're it might be best to show you an example. I was at an assignment for, I think, about a year. We were at a company, and they wanted to redo their whole technology stack. So that they use very old technology, and they want to switch to something more modern. We started working agile there as well. So they decided, because we had to do about 30 products, that every component needed to be reusable, needed to be generic. So they chose a small application to start with, so that at least we could get some results in not too much time. And after a year, we had a complete toolbox of a lot of generic components that could be used with all other applications. It would help us to build all these applications very fast. And then we had a very unhappy customer, because we only used the components once, and we spent a year building something, a very small application. So they felt like they lost a whole lot. Basically, that customer asked us to over-engineer. We did it, and then we had an unhappy customer. So be aware of this sign. It belongs more in the waterfall, where you really design and etc. So taking a look at team requirements. Of course, the team has some requirements as well. Basically, we have one environment. So keep in mind that though the process may change, your team members, the characters of your team members won't change. Your team members adapt to the process, but their characters won't change. And what this means is, for example, I'm a developer, and if you want me to develop good things, I need some peace every now and then. And every type of person needs a certain environment in which they do their work best. So, for example, if you look at Agile, what is a pitfall there might be that you start planning sessions every day, a couple of times a day, and then you'll see that your developers, their productivity will go down a lot, or your testers, their productivity will go down because every time they're distracted by some session that has been organized. So keep in mind the environment where they're working. Is it an open office environment? Make sure that your team is comfortable with this and that they can still do their work. The tools. So tools are not important. And I think that's an important part. You will hear a lot about, for example, Azure DevOps or Jira, or someone is completely convinced with the best tool for doing your DevOps process, for example. It doesn't really matter. Your people are used to some certain tools, and as long as it's possible, try to give them that freedom. Often they will get the best results with the tools they know best, right? So if you want to work on a Mac, just work on a Mac. Don't force them to use Windows because they're not proficient with it, and etc. Don't get guided by the tools. It's the results that matter. Yeah, communication is very important, and one of the important parts is the key to doing good communication is not to talk often, but to streamline your communication. So, for example, the Scrum Guide has a lot of mentions a lot of sessions, like doing a retrospective, a stand-up, the refinements. They all have specific purposes, and it's good to focus your communication in around that purpose. So, and of course, there's quality. Quality includes CI/CD, things like the testing pyramid, static code analysis, vulnerability scans, and try to automate as much as possible. The proper level of quality is very important to match also the process which you're working in. For example, if your quality is too low with, for example, with DevOps, let's say you have only a 50% code coverage on your code base in your regression testing, you're doing deployments and bugs will enter your production environment. A tendency of a customer is typically to add an acceptance environment in which they can test first. So you will see them put in barriers just to make sure that that at least in production they will get the quality. So it's very important to take this into account as well. Don't get rushed by implementing new user stories if this isn't up to par. So some signs that a team might fail is, like I just explained. So when quality goes down, the barriers go up. Actually, I was with a customer once. They implemented a new product. They were working for about 18 months, and they asked me to join the team as an architect because basically what they did, the team was started to develop. For 18 months, they have produced code, and they lost all control of their architecture. So basically they needed a redesign of their architecture. So make sure that you keep the level of quality up to par with the complexity of your product. Don't talk but communicate. I think it's clear. Just talking doesn't necessarily mean that information has been added to your situation. and it can quickly go out of hand, especially if you're sitting with a team in a room or in an open office. If everyone is talking, then you'll see concentration go down, etc. So if you make this more effective, you'll see a better performance of your team as well. So a good sign is that your team will not adapt. The reason I'm saying this is, so there may be situations where everything is perfect and you don't need to change anything, but it probably isn't where you are. So most of the locations, you will be able to change to adapt to some situation, and make sure that you keep this in mind. You take a look at things that might go wrong, are going wrong. Don't get complacent. Make sure you change. You improve your situation every time. If this doesn't happen, it could well be a sign that your team is not fully committed or doesn't feel responsible to make these changes. Once again, it comes down to trust. So some generic pitfalls, just to wrap it up. Make sure at a stand-up you use, or it goes for every session, but stand-up is a very nice example. So if everyone started explaining how they spent their time, my good sign might be we had meeting X yesterday, or I wasn't there, I was doing something else. That's a sign that, well, it doesn't really better for stand-up. For a stand-up, you want to be focused, for example, on what needs to be done. Are there any impediments, and what effect does it have on a team? Don't explain how much time you spend somewhere. Yeah, and this goes for every session. Use it for what it's for. So a Scrum Master is not a team manager. The point with a team, if you want to have a team feel responsible, they should be responsible collectively. So they should be treated as such as well. So the Scrum Master is not the team manager who is responsible for example, the performance of a team, but he is a part of the team, the member of the team that can manage the Scrum process best, or the DevOps process best. Do everything that's around it, so someone like a tester can do the testing. And this was also a nice one. I've actually heard one customer say this: okay, we're doing DevOps because our developers fix the bugs that happen in production. I found it to be funny and very sad as well. Sometimes this is the level of comprehension of a customer, and you will see that as soon as you introduce something like a DevOps process, many people think of it in different ways, and make sure that you understand the process, and your customers have attach the same meaning to this process, because you would be amazed at the many different views there are on DevOps. I think that was my presentation. So are there any questions?
Thanks for taking us through that, Edwin. Attendees, in case of any queries, please let us know through the chat and Q&A sections.
Okay, if there are no
Okay.
questions, sorry.
Yeah, Claude had mentioned that no questions, but thanks for a very clear presentation of the key points. So, thanks, Edwin, for taking us through this. Participants, in case of any queries, please feel free to reach out to Edwin at his mail ID. Thank you for joining us, and thanks a lot, Edwin, for taking us through this.
Yeah, great. Thank you for attending, and also have a good day. If you have any questions, please let me know through Skype or email or something. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.